You have felt it before. That moment when you open your eyes in the morning and, before you even remember where you are, something heavy settles back onto your chest. Not grief exactly, not panic, just the quiet, suffocating weight of a life that has not turned out the way you planned. You know that feeling. You have carried it. And if you have ever wondered whether a person can start again, truly start again, at an age when the world has already decided your story is finished, then this is the story you have been waiting to hear. His name was Raymond Osei. He was 52 years old. And on the morning of March 4th, he had exactly $11.37 in his bank account. He did not discover this at a bank. He discovered it at a gas station, standing under cold fluorescent lights at 6:14 in the morning, holding a coffee he could not pay for. The card declined. He checked the number on the screen again. He looked at the cashier, a young woman barely 20, who looked away with a kindness that somehow made it worse. He put the coffee back. He walked out into the parking lot. He sat in his 2009 Honda Accord with a cracked left taillight and he stared at the steering wheel for a long time. 52 years old. A former regional sales director. 2 decades of climbing. A divorce. A business that failed in the 3rd year. A second attempt that was swallowed by a market shift he never saw coming. And now a rented room in his cousin's house in Akron, Ohio, where he slept on a mattress that sagged on one side and kept a single framed photograph of his daughter on the windowsill because there was no room for a nightstand. The photograph was the only thing he had brought from the house he used to own. He did not cry that morning at the gas station. He was past crying. He had cried at the bankruptcy. He had cried at the divorce. He had cried once, quietly, in a diner parking lot after a job interview at a company that ultimately hired someone 20 years younger. After enough of those moments, you do not cry anymore. You just sit. You sit and you feel the particular exhaustion of a man who has fought hard for a long time and arrived, somehow, at nothing. He drove back to his cousin's house. He climbed the stairs. He sat on the edge of the sagging mattress. He looked at his daughter's photograph. Her name was Amara and she was 24 and she lived in Atlanta and she called him every Sunday. He never told her how bad it was. She asked how things were going and he said, slowly getting there, and she said, I know you'll figure it out, Dad, and he said, I know, and then after he hung up he sat in the silence of that small room and felt the full, unadorned weight of those words. Slowly getting there. Getting there from where? Going where? He did not have an answer. Not that night. Not for a long time. What he had instead was a notebook. It was not a special notebook. It was a green composition book he had found in his cousin's kitchen drawer. The kind you buy in bulk for schoolchildren. The cover was slightly water-damaged. Some of the pages were already wrinkled. He had started writing in it 3 weeks earlier, not because he had a plan, but because he could not sleep and he needed somewhere to put the noise in his head. He wrote slowly. He wrote about the business. He wrote about the decisions he had made that he wished he could unmake. He wrote about the things he had learned, about supply chains, about client relationships, about the exact moment trust in a business begins to erode and why most people never see it until it is already gone. He wrote without purpose. He wrote because the alternative was lying in the dark listening to his own breathing. He did not know yet that the notebook would save his life. On the morning after the gas station, Raymond woke at 5:47. He had not set an alarm. His body simply woke him, the way bodies do when sleep becomes too thin to hold. He lay there for a moment. Then he did something he had not done in months. He got up before he had a reason to. He made instant coffee in the small kitchen. He sat at the table by the window. He opened the green notebook. He read what he had written. And for the first time, something shifted. Not dramatically. There was no music. No revelation. But reading his own words, the hard-won, specific, battle-tested things he had learned about how businesses live and die, he noticed something he had not noticed before. He had been thinking of his knowledge as evidence of failure. Every lesson was attached to a loss. Every insight was a scar. But sitting there in the early morning with bad coffee going cold beside him, he began to wonder if he had been reading those pages backwards. What if the failure was not the story? What if the failure was the tuition? What if 23 years of building and losing and rebuilding had produced something that most people would spend a decade trying to learn and still get wrong? He wrote one sentence at the bottom of the page. He underlined it twice. What I know is worth more than what I lost. He closed the notebook. He did not know what to do with that sentence yet, but he kept it. The next morning he was up at 5:45. The morning after that, 5:43. It was not a grand commitment. There was no resolution. It was simply that the mornings felt like the only time the day belonged entirely to him. Before his cousin woke up, before the weight of the afternoon returned, before the job boards opened and closed without responding. In the mornings between 5:45 and 7:30, Raymond Osei was not a 52-year-old man with $11. He was just a man with a cup of coffee and a notebook and something accumulating on the page. He began to structure what he knew. Not as a resume, resumes had not worked, but as something else. He wrote out, in plain language, every mistake he had watched companies make in the early years of growth. He wrote about the 3 supplier relationships that had nearly destroyed his first business and how he had saved them. He wrote about the psychology of a sales team losing confidence and the exact interventions that could turn it. He wrote about cash flow, not the textbook version, but the real version, the one that happens at 11 p.m. when the numbers do not line up and you have to decide what to pay and what to defer and who to call first. He wrote 43 pages in 9 days. On the 10th day, his phone rang at 9 a.m. It was a man named Gerald, a former colleague from his sales director years, someone he had helped build a territory in Michigan a long time ago. Gerald was now running a small manufacturing company and was drowning. His sales team was failing. His margins were bleeding. He had tried 2 consultants. Neither had helped. He had remembered Raymond. He was calling, he said, not because he expected much, he was just out of ideas. Raymond said he could come in and take a look. He drove 2 hours to Gerald's office. He sat across from 3 department heads and a sales manager. He spent 40 minutes asking questions and saying almost nothing. Then he spent 20 minutes explaining, clearly and specifically, exactly what was wrong and exactly what needed to change. He did not read from anything. He did not reference his notebook. The notebook had done its work already. The things he had written down had become the things he simply knew. Gerald called him the next morning. He said, I do not know how to explain what you did in that room. He said, my sales manager came to me this morning and said she finally understood her own numbers. He said, what do you want for this? Raymond did not have an answer ready. He said, let me think about it. He drove home. He sat at the kitchen table. He opened the green notebook. He turned to a blank page and he wrote one question at the top. What is this actually worth? He sat with that question for a long time. He almost talked himself out of it. There was a voice in his head. There is always a voice that said he had gotten lucky, that Gerald was a friend, that nobody would pay a 52-year-old man without a recent track record for advice about their business, that he should find a real job, that this was not a real thing. He nearly closed the notebook. He nearly picked up his phone to check the job boards instead. He did not. He stayed at the table. He let the voice run out of things to say. And then, in the silence after it, he wrote a number beneath the question. It was not a small number. It was not a large number. It was the number that felt true. He called Gerald back. He said the number out loud. There was a pause. Gerald said, that works. That was the first morning Raymond understood what his mornings had actually been building. He did not celebrate. He deposited the payment and paid his cousin 3 months of back rent in cash and said nothing about where it came from. He bought a new notebook, dark blue, hardcover, with a proper elastic band across the cover, and he placed the green water damaged composition book on the windowsill next to his daughter's photograph. He kept waking at 5:45. The work grew slowly, not quickly, not in the way stories sometimes pretend transformation happens. Gerald referred him to another business owner. That owner referred him to 2 more. There were months where nothing came in. There was a month, the 7th month, where he took a temporary warehouse job to cover his expenses because the consulting work had gone quiet, and he refused to go backward on his cousin's hospitality. He worked the warehouse 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon, came home, showered, opened the notebook, and wrote for 2 hours. He did not complain about the warehouse. He wrote about the inventory management system he had observed there and why it was losing the company money it did not know it was losing. He sent that analysis unsolicited to the warehouse owner. The owner called him 3 days later. He became a client. In the second year, Raymond moved out of his cousin's house. He rented a 1-bedroom apartment 20 minutes away. It was small. The kitchen window faced a wall. He did not care. He set up a small desk by the window and placed the green notebook on the corner of the desk where he could see it when he sat down in the morning. The blue hardcover notebook had been filled and replaced twice. He was on his third. He called Amara on a Sunday in April of that year. She asked how things were going. He said, "I think I am finally figuring something out." She said, "I always knew you would, Dad." He said, "I know." And this time, when he hung up, the silence afterward did not feel like a wait. Felt like space. Room enough for what was coming. By the third year, he was billing consistently. He had built a small reputation in a specific world. Manufacturing companies between 10 and 50 employees, usually in the Midwest, usually hitting a wall they could not see past. He did not advertise. He did not have a website for a long time. He had a notebook full of hard-earned knowledge and a phone that rang because the people he had helped told the people they knew. He moved into a proper office in the 4th year. Not large. 1 room, a good chair, a window that faced a street with trees. He placed both notebooks on the shelf above his desk, the green composition book with the water-damaged cover, and the first blue hardcover. He could see them from his desk every morning. He still woke at 5:45, not because he had to, because the mornings were still his. On the morning of his 57th birthday, Raymond Osei opened his laptop and looked at the number in his business account. He sat quietly with that number for a while. Then he opened the current notebook, a 4th blue hardcover nearly full, and he wrote the date at the top of a new page. He wrote the number. Then he wrote, beneath it, the sentence he had written 5 years earlier in a water-damaged composition book at a kitchen table in his cousin's house. "What I know is worth more than what I lost." He underlined it again. Then he closed the notebook and he made his coffee, and he sat by the window and watched the street come slowly awake in the early light. What changes a life is rarely what we expect. It is not the breakthrough moment. It is not the lucky meeting or the sudden windfall. It is the morning you decide to get up before you have a reason to. It is the hour you claim for yourself before the weight of the day returns. It is the decision to treat what you have survived as something of value rather than evidence of your failure. Raymond Osei did not rebuild his life with money. He rebuilt it with mornings, with a notebook, with the slow, unglamorous act of writing down what he knew until he finally believed it was worth something. You have knowledge inside you right now that you have been reading as evidence of your losses. Turn the page. Read it differently. The story of what you know has not finished being written. And the most important chapter, the one that changes everything, begins the same way his did. Before the sun is fully up. With a quiet table. And one sentence you write for yourself alone. Get up. The morning is yours. There is something they do not tell you about starting over at 52. They tell you it is hard. They tell you the world is built for younger people. They tell you that timing matters, that doors close, that momentum belongs to the ones who started earlier. What they do not tell you, what Raymond could not have told you on that morning at the gas station, holding a coffee he could not pay for, is that everything you have been through is a form of capital. Every failure is a lesson held in the body. Every near miss is a calibration. Every hard year is data that a 26-year-old with ambition and no scars simply does not have access to. Raymond did not know this the morning he put the coffee back. He learned it slowly. He learned it the way real things are learned, not in a single moment of clarity, but through the patient accumulation of mornings where he chose to sit down and do the work before he felt ready, before he felt certain, before he felt anything other than tired and unsure and quietly determined to not give up on the version of himself that still believed something was possible. The green notebook was not magic. The 5:45 alarm was not magic. What was magic, if you can call it that, was the decision, repeated every single morning, to treat his own knowledge as something worth excavating. Most people bury what they know under layers of shame about how they came to know it. Raymond learned to do the opposite. He learned to hold up each scar and ask, What did this teach me that nobody else in that room knows? He learned to see the bankruptcy not as an ending but as a PhD he had paid for in the hardest possible currency. He learned that the most expensive education in the world is the one the world gives you without asking your permission. And he learned that the only way to collect on that education is to start treating yourself as the expert you have become. That is the truth that Raymond's story keeps arriving at, no matter which direction you approach it from. The knowledge was always there. The mornings were not building something new. They were uncovering something old, something true, something that had been buried under the weight of everything that had gone wrong, waiting for the hour when a man decided to sit down in the quiet and start reading his own life differently. The cracked taillight on the 2009 Honda Accord. He got it fixed in the second year. A small thing. He drove to the shop, paid the technician, drove home. He told no one. But he noticed it that evening when he walked back to the car, and he stood there in the parking lot for a moment, and something in his chest shifted. Not triumph, not relief, something quieter. The recognition that the car he drove now was exactly the same car, but it was not the same life. He had not bought a new car. He had simply fixed what was broken. He had simply stayed at the table long enough for the table to become worth sitting at. The green composition book never left the windowsill. After he moved into the apartment, after the office, after the years that followed, it stayed. Slightly warped. Water-damaged cover. The handwriting in it uneven. Written in the dark hours of a man who did not yet know what he was building. He never wrote in it again. It was not a tool anymore. It was a record. Evidence that on the night when he had nothing, he still had enough to fill a page. He still had enough to begin. You are going to start tomorrow morning. Earlier than you have been starting. Before the phone, before the news, before the weight of the day finds you in bed and tells you who you are and what you are worth. You are going to sit down somewhere quiet with something to write on, and you are going to begin excavating what you already know. Not what you wish you knew. Not what you plan to learn. What you already know right now, today, from every single thing you have survived and built and lost and endured. You are going to read that knowledge the right way around. You are going to stop treating your scars as reasons and start treating them as resources. Raymond Osei was 52 with $11.37. He woke up at 5:45 and opened a water-damaged notebook and chose, on an ordinary Tuesday morning, to believe that what he knew was worth more than what he had lost. 5 years later, sitting at a desk in a quiet office with trees outside the window, he opened a fourth notebook and wrote that same sentence again. Not because he had forgotten it, because some truths need to be written every single time you live them. They do not diminish with repetition. They deepen. Your morning is waiting. The notebook is already in the drawer. The sentence that changes your life is already somewhere in you, waiting to be written. Get up. The morning is yours. It has always been yours.